Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
Everyday work conversations should be clear, concise, and get to the point quickly. The problem is, we don't always know how to do this. Because what does it mean to be concise? And how can you summarize a complex topic in just a few lines? My guest, Chris Fenning, has the answers to these and other questions. Listen in, and you'll learn how to get great results by applying one technique to almost every discussion, email, presentation, and interview. Hey, Chris, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm looking forward to learning more about how you can have more effective communication. And before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and especially your book, The First Minute?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm an engineer by training. And I say by training because I haven't been a practicing engineer for quite a few years. And that path led me into a sort of wannabe project manager. I fell into a project manager role, then took a more measured path through project management, ended up being a software delivery manager, and rose up through the ranks to lead a PMO. At the same time, I was competing in public speaking, was very much enjoying Toastmasters and seeing where that could push me. And those two things, the being in a senior position, in a PMO, in a project office, and speaking to a lot of senior leaders, working with a lot of clients, coupled with doing more public speaking, moved my desires and honed my abilities in public speaking and in communication at work. And I really enjoyed the connection between the two. And one of the things that quickly became apparent to me was there wasn't a lot of focus on how public speaking can help at work, particularly the fundamentals of being clear, being concise, knowing how to summarize things. And I spent a number of years doing a lot of communication courses, being on executive development programs, and I never quite found the answer to my question, which was, how do you create a great summary? And what is a surefire way to be clear and concise at the beginning of a conversation? And because I couldn't find something, through all of the research I was doing, the conversations I was having, I began to develop my own ideas of what those could be. And so I took other people's models, the things that I was seeing work in different circumstances, and baked all of that together with my own musings on the topic and put it together into a book called The First Minute, which is how to start conversations that get results.
That's great, because any of us can have the conversations. It's getting the results. I'm going to get into a question about that a little later on. But if we dive right into it, what's one tip that our listeners and viewers need to know?
This is an easy one. Stop asking for a minute, which is ironic because the title of the book is The First Minute. But when we start communicating, one of the first things we do is, do you have a minute? Do you have a moment?
That's right.
And almost none of those conversations take a minute. In fact, most of those conversations, it takes more than a minute for people to get to their point. And the reason I say stop asking for it is you're setting yourself up for missing your own self-imposed target. You're talking to someone and saying, I just want a minute, and then you blow that completely and take a lot longer to even have your point. It's a very small thing, but it can be your first interaction with someone new. It can be a repeated interaction with someone you know. And it's a very, very small thing that you can stop doing. So instead of asking for a minute, take 10 seconds before you talk to the person and think, how long is this really going to take? Do I need 3 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe 10? Ask for that. And if you come in underneath, then you're winning.
That's a great idea, because asking for a minute, hey, you got a minute, has become so watered down, it doesn't even seem to register anymore.
Yeah. And how many times do people say, do you have a minute, and then pull up a chair? That's not a minute conversation.
That's true. And when people seriously do have a minute or 3 minutes and you say, hey, got a minute? They might be thinking, okay, this is 15 minutes that I don't have, so I have to say no or get tense about it. So that's a great point. Next question. It has to do with that first minute. My clients and I, we discuss at length the importance during a presentation, whether it's on stage or in a business atmosphere, the importance of that opening. I know you said about asking for a first minute, but in that first minute, why is it more important than all the other minutes you have?
It's the foundation of the conversation. And I'd like to address this from presentations and other conversations as well, because there's a slight difference in that. Presentations, people think of TED Talks where you've got to have a hook and draw your audience in. Those are very different from everyday work conversations or meetings or work presentations. So the TED style is more entertaining and conveying an idea, and it's more of a spectacle. But even in those, when you're up on stage, in that first minute, the audience needs to know why they've got to pay attention to you. And you've got to be engaging, you've got to have clarity, because without those things, you lose them. And a lot of public speaking courses will focus on that, and it is very important. But we seem to forget about it when we then get to work or do the presentation in front of our team, or we're talking to 3 or 4 colleagues, which is still a form of public speaking. But in that case, the first minute is setting the foundation for getting people's focus, helping them tune out everything else that's in their head, letting them know what they need to do with the information you're about to give them, and then giving them a summary of the whole story. So imagine listening to the news and they didn't give a headline and a brief summary. Imagine they just dove straight into the depth of the story. The audience would be having whiplash, going, what is this story about? Why am I listening to this? The first minute, the first 30 seconds sets the foundation for the rest of the conversation, even if it's only a 3-minute conversation.
So now that we know why, can you give our listeners and our viewers some things they should do in that first minute, the steps they should take?
Absolutely, yes. And I'm going to try very hard not to go down a rabbit hole, because I did a bunch of research when putting this together. And the science behind it is very interesting. So I will mention it, but be warned, you may have to pull me up out of a rabbit hole on this.
All right, I'll do that.
So when we start talking, and this is true in work, on the stage, talking to friends, when we start talking to someone, the topic that's in our head is guaranteed not to be the topic that's in your audience's head. So the very first thing you need to do is let the person you're talking to know what you're going to talk about. And in the model that I've put in the book, it's the first 15 seconds of a conversation is called framing. And you frame a conversation by providing context, letting them know what the topic is, telling people what they need to do with the information, and then delivering a headline. Without framing, you're going to lose your audience. So the first thing you do is you tell them what the topic is. Of all the things in the known universe, I want to talk about this project or that sales meeting or the performance review we had last week or the accounts that Janet sent over. Whatever it is, you can say it in a couple of words, and then your audience is no longer thinking about the meeting they just came from, or the meeting they're about to go to, or picking up the kids, or any number of other things.
Right. You get them from where they are to where you need them to be.
Exactly right. And that's in 4 or 5 words by providing context. The second thing is, once people know what the topic is, their brains start trying to work out, well, what do I do with this information? What do you want from me? Why are you telling me this? What's happening here? So the second thing you provide is intent. If I'm talking to you, I need to let you know what I need, want, or expect you to do with the information. Am I asking you a question? Am I looking for some advice? Am I just chatting because I want to chat? Until you, as the recipient, know that, you're going to be trying to work out, well, what do I do with this information? And while your brain is doing that, you're not listening and taking in the information that's being given. So it's really distracting. So step 1, provide context. This is what we want to talk about. Step 2, show clear intent. This is what I want or expect or need you to do with the information. And then step 3 is deliver a headline. deliver a key message. And that is a one-line summary, just like the first line of the news, so that the audience knows, okay, this is the key, this is the topic we're going to be talking about, this is the message that's coming across. I'm now ready to listen to the rest of the conversation. And if you do those three things, you'll bring your audience's attention away from what they're thinking about. You'll bring it to your topic. They'll feel a bit relieved because they know what's expected of them. And they'll have an idea of what's coming next. And then you can get on with the rest of the conversation.
I love the point you made about the headline. And if you're watching the news without a headline, it'd be odd if they just jumped in. When I'm speaking to clients or just having a conversation about communication and speaking, I'll say, how many magazines have you ever read? How many articles without reading the headline?
Yeah.
The answer is none. No one ever disregarded looking at the headline and said, you know what? I'll just read this article. I have no idea what it's about. I have no idea what I'll get out of it, but I'll just read it.
It's a great, you've just described an absolutely fantastic analogy to then take it a step further and say, imagine you start reading an article on paragraph 7. That's what it's like when you start communicating and just dive into the detail straight away. Without any framing, without any summary, that's just giving someone an article and go, start from paragraph 7 and work out what this is, what we're trying to talk about.
You know, you put it in those contexts and people get it.
Absolutely. I do want to add one caveat, because the question that comes up, one of the questions that comes up most often is, well, you talk about the first minute and jumping into context and intent and key message. What about the relationship side, the getting to know people? So I do want to be very clear that the first minute in this context is when you start talking about the work topic. Absolutely begin your conversations with colleagues, finding out how they are, pleasantries, relationship building, talking about the weekend. The human side is critically important. And at no point do I ever want to say you shouldn't do that. But once you switch to the work topic, that's when the first minute starts. And that's where the communication changes from social into transactional. And work communication is generally transactional. And that's why we can be so prescriptive on the pieces that are needed to help give a clear message.
You know, I was thinking when you were saying this, there's so many different industries, so many different jobs. Does this work pretty much across the board, or are there places where it wouldn't work?
It does work pretty much across the board. One of the great things about the models in this book is they are about such a short period of time that almost every conversation needs to begin with those things for it to make sense. And again, I come back to the news examples. All news has that same structure to help set the scene, get the information out there so you can engage with the story and move on. There are situations where this is not appropriate. If you're a heart surgeon, I'm pretty sure they're not going to use these steps while asking for something else. Similarly, Formula One pit crews and astronauts. And there are going to be a lot of rather extreme communication events where these aren't applicable. But for everyday work, they are. Another situation where I wouldn't advise using them is in very challenging conversations. If you're talking to someone about performance challenges and things like that, there's a lot of really good information available on how to have those conversations. Don't recommend doing this for that, for those. But these methods work for the 80% of the day to day, which is where we have very little training throughout our entire lives on how to communicate at work. It's a gap. So 80% of work conversations in almost all industries. And I've personally applied these in 6 different industries, from the travel industry, internet, healthcare, telecoms, defense, sporting goods. And I've worked with people all around the world where these have worked in their industries.
In various countries too, right?
In various countries, yes. 102, I think, I had a course that was running last year, and there were participants from 102 countries. And it was fantastic to get a real test. There's nothing like testing a theory and a model by putting it out there and having thousands of people pick it apart. And I have to thank them, because they helped make it stronger and give better examples that all went into the book.
The one thing we're always fearful of is the critique. Yet the critique is what helps us refine.
It is. It's a painful but necessary process, and it ends up being better for everyone. It's while some of these ideas were my baby, some of these are based on things that other people have done, and it's all sourced in the book, and folks are credited. So,
now, have you ever presented this and anybody say, yeah, but it's different for me? That's not going to work.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an occasion where that hasn't happened. And other than perhaps friends who are humoring me, no, there's always someone who challenges. And the main challenge tends to be on the second of the two models. So we went into some depth on framing, which is the first 15 seconds of a conversation. The second technique is called the structured summary. And it's a 3-part way to summarize anything at work. And I say that hoping that someone will come back and challenge so that, again, I can go through the refining process. But so far, it's worked in every situation it's been thrown at, as long as we're talking about work. And the objection that I get when people go, that won't work for me, is worded like this. Yes, but my topic is too complex to be summarized. And that is always the objection. And it's great when it comes up because it provides a worked example to go through, and we take their topic and find ways to summarize it.
Now, do you find most people are doing this on their own, reading your book or getting help with this, or are companies encouraging their employees to do it? I know the answer because I read it in your book and I found it to be eye-opening. How much time can be saved by using these methods? Communication time, or going back and reiterating what you meant, or getting false results or inaccurate results because someone didn't understand what you needed.
Yeah, how much time? This is the question people want to know, because is it worth investing time to learn this to then save time later on? And a study was done by Siemens, the technology company, and they found over a pretty extensive study that in a company of 100 people, over 800 hours a year are lost by people having to go back to validate what they've heard. And that's not an insignificant amount of time. If you think of the hourly rate that you pay people in your companies, 800 hours, that's a pretty decent sized project that you wouldn't want to spend that money for no return. And the thing I found most interesting about that study is that only accounted for the time to go back and double check and make sure that the communication was clear. It didn't account for the mistaken assumptions, the work that had to be redone because somebody misunderstood a message. It didn't account for the meetings that took an hour instead of 15 minutes. So on top of those 800 hours for a 100-person company, and you can scale that to whatever size your organization is, on top of that, there's all the other lost time and mistakes, costly mistakes, or simple mistakes, but it all costs time and money or ends up with a bad customer experience because we haven't clearly understood what is being asked of us.
I work quite often with attorneys and law firms. And law firms, as soon as you start speaking about training, even when they come to me first, it's always billable hours. I mean, they live and die, right? Billable hours, yeah. Billable hours. And you start talking that way and let them do the math, and suddenly they can see how many billable hours they're already burning, that perhaps they can get a good chunk of those back.
They absolutely can. You've raised the point that it's a challenge for communications training in general. I should start this with I believe, because it's not a fact, but it's something that I believe, in that communication is listed as a soft skill.
Yes. And
first of all, I think there are aspects of communication that are absolutely hard skills. They can be taught, they can be tested, they can be measured. So communication as a whole isn't a soft skill. But even if it is, even if companies consider it a soft skill, when thinking about training, the money that they spend on training for communication tends to be targeted at leaders. And we were talking about this just prior to coming on.
Sure.
That leaders or soon-to-be leaders get the money for communications training because it's important for leaders to communicate well. I would counter that with it's important for everyone to communicate well. And we know this because every single job description includes communication skills in the top 3 or 5 spaces. So communication is important. We say it's important, and we provide very little training universally, right. Very little training to the mass employees. It's reserved. It's a very, it's like cobalt. It's a very limited resource that is just for a few special people who are going to rise to the top. And I think if we change our thinking on communications training, we'll be able to just help improve efficiency in organizations generally. And that's no small thing.
No, it's not. You know, I agree with you, and I know I'm biased. Here that, yes, just virtually everybody should have communication training. But it astounds me how many people in higher positions say, well, we'll promote Peter to this position. Now, that position might require a great deal of communication internally, externally, outside the company, whatever it might be. And they may not take that into consideration. And just because you change my title on my business card and on my door and everything else doesn't mean I suddenly have the communication ability and the skills needed to do that job as I need to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I believe it's because of a lack of structured communication training through education and through graduate programs and through entry-level jobs and as people rise up. We spend, 14 years in education, 18 if you get a degree, more than that if you do any kind of postgraduate study. And in that time, how much of that is really communications training for skills that will be useful at work?
Oh, very little.
It's very little. And we spend all of that time on receive mode. We receive information, or we're being tested, or we're answering very transactional questions where we have to get the answer right. And that is our experience. And then we launch out of education into a job, and communicating is totally different at work. There's a different set of rules, a different set of requirements. It's not social communication. So there's a lot that we could do socially through education to move the needle, to just make small changes to help people learn some of the fundamentals of communicating at work, because it is different than communicating socially, and it is a taught and a learned skill.
Now, we're saying communication, and quite often when we hear the word communication, we thought of the spoken word. Can you use your method in other types of communication?
You can, yes. It is applicable in emails and in meeting invites. Meeting invites is one of my soapbox topics. And I will start by saying, if you ever send me a blank meeting invite, you'll get a blank response. So don't send blank meeting invites. Emails, presentations, but particularly emails and meetings they're the beginnings of conversation. They're the beginnings of communication. And just like when we speak to people, if you receive a piece of written word, you need to know the context, the intent, the key message, and then a pretty good summary, and good meaning short and to the point, a pretty good summary of what it's about, so that you're prepared to digest the rest of it. And in the book, I lay out some examples, because people sometimes get a little, they get quite specific and, well, where do I put these different items when I'm writing an email? Does it go in the subject line or in the body? It doesn't really matter. There are some suggestions laid out in the book and some examples. The point is that the key pieces need to be there. When someone opens an email, they need to know, what's the topic and what do you want me to do with this? Are you just telling me a story, or are you asking me to help you with something? So it absolutely works for emails. And again, it works for meetings. And anyone watching this on the video will see me grinning at this point. The reason I really like it for meetings is it kills a lot of birds with one stone. It's a multi-use tool. When you send a meeting invite, people need to know, well, what's the topic? What are you expecting me to do in this meeting? Right. And what are we hoping to get out of it? So again, the same things: context, intent, key message. And there's a way that you can write a meeting invite that you can then use those words to start the meeting. And it's helped people overcome their fear of talking in meetings, because they could literally read it. It's helped people in the room at the beginning of the meeting focus, because whether they read the invite 3 days before or not, they get a reminder of what's the topic, why are we here, what are we meant to do. So by using these same points, and you could bullet point them out in the invite, it can be as clear as literally writing context equals this, the intent is that. You can use the prompts if you find that helpful. But it gives you a tool to start the meeting, to bring the focus of people in the room, and to calm your own nerves. If you're a little nervous about talking, or you've just rushed from another call or another meeting, you get those first 30 seconds to work through those bullets and just get everybody onto the same page.
That's great to hear, because let's face it, we all knock meetings, right? Another meeting. I have to be in another meeting, whether it's on Zoom now or when we were meeting, and when we're meeting in person again, we'll be saying it again. They could have emailed that in. It was a waste of my time. I could be getting things done, all these different things. And I'm thinking, when I hear that, it's not meetings that's the problem. It's the lack of focus. It's the lack of reason. Or we have a meeting, a team meeting every Monday at 9, whether we need to or not.
That was the intention. I come back to my engineering roots. Is I like a formula or a process. I want to know the steps. And one of the challenges I always found with communications training that I received, and I had some great training, not knocking it, but there was a gap, which was, people say the key to good communication, the key to starting is to know your point, to be brief and be clear and concise. Right? That's excellent. But those are goals. Those are aspirational statements. None of those is a method I can apply. I can't apply clear and concise to my communication.
That's right.
It's like, how do I? It's not a thing. So I wanted the steps, and I wanted you give me the steps to fill in the blanks, make it as simple as possible for me, because at the beginning of my career, and probably still now, I tend to run long on certain topics when I'm talking, and I need a framework to help me start. And the great thing about this is it not only helped me, it then helped the people on the desk next to me and my teams and other departments. And it grew and grew into what has become a new career.
What's the biggest change you've seen in someone you've worked with? Anyone you can think of off the top of your head? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
but a face popped into my head as soon as you asked the question. And the change was somebody who was a very capable project manager who needed to present to a senior leader, a challenging, very challenging senior leader. Challenging for lots of good reasons, but they expected concision, and they expected facts, and the delivery needed to be good. Right. And this project manager was an excellent project manager. They were really good at their job. And as you said about promoting people up, they were being blocked from being promoted because they were quiet as a mouse in a meeting. And it turns out through talking with them and sort of understanding what their goals were and what their concerns were, their concern was they never knew quite how to structure what they wanted to say. And so we said, okay, what do you, we went through conversations, we ran through some examples, and she did some of the classic things of either diving down into the detail or not starting with the intent, or not really having a good clear message and going off sideways. Lots of good information, but not structured in a way that was really easy to put in a box, put in front of this leader and say, now here's what you need to know. After working through these techniques and some other sort of vocal confidence activities as well for general speaking in a bigger space than she was used to, after applying these techniques, she spoke up in every single presentation, meeting, and executive update after that. And she did it with confidence, with clarity, so much so that the vision I've got in my mind at the moment is when she spoke up, other people in the room sat up straighter.
Wow.
She went from being very, very quiet to being the one that made other people pay attention. And just absolutely fantastic transformation. The credit goes to her. She put all the effort and the work in to make that happen.
And that has to build on itself. When you realize people are sitting up and listening when you're speaking, you have more confidence, right?
Yes.
You get that confidence, and that helps you do it more and probably more effective, which just makes people listen even more. Give us one last tip for our listeners and viewers of what they could do to be most effective in this.
Okay. So aside from applying these two techniques, when you start a conversation, you're asking someone else for time. Unless you've pre-planned a meeting and you're sitting down one-to-one, any conversation is really a request for their time and their attention. So once you've started the conversation, you've given them a good framing, you've summarized your topic, ask them if they have the ability and the availability to help you right now. Because
I love that
you
line.
might have asked someone something that they're not the right person to answer. They might send you in a different direction. So you take that advice and go in that direction. They may not have the availability. They might be on their way to the restroom. They might be on their way to another meeting. They might be on their way home. Once you've asked someone for their time, check if they have the ability and availability to help you right then. And they'll probably say yes. But you're giving them a get out clause before you dump all the detail and the information on them. To do that, it's polite and people will really appreciate you for it.
All right, before we wrap up, this will get you totally on the spot. I didn't tell you I was going to do this. I want to come off the top of your head. Who's your favorite musician, singer, band, whoever it might be, and why?
Tom and Barbara Brown. They are two folk singers from North Devon, and they have spent so much of their life finding and cataloging and singing and bringing to life very old traditional folk music in England. And they're in addition to just being wonderful people, what they have done is preserve some of history in a form of music which is actually coming back. There's a TikTok chap who's bringing back sea shanties, so there seems to be a resurgence in folk music. Off the top of my head, that's my answer. There's probably a dozen more, but those were the names that came to mind.
I love that as opposed to the Beatles, the Stones, Adele, whoever it may be. That's taking it home, as it were, because you are from England, right?
I am. In fact, I for a while lived in the same village as them, so they're near and dear to my heart as well. But you did put me on the spot. They were literally the first names that came to mind. So that's what I said.
Thanks. That's awesome. All right. So where can our listeners and viewers learn more about you, the services you can provide to help them communicate more effectively? And of course, where can they get The First Minute, the book?
Okay. I've got a website, chrisfenning.com. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. And that's got a list of all the things that I can provide. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Of all the social platforms, that's where I like to spend my time. I'm helping people in that space. And the book, The First Minute, is available from all good bookstores. You can obviously get it on Amazon, but it is available. You can order it from about 60,000 different bookstores around the world. So go to whichever one you like. You can also buy it through my website.
Excellent. Audible yet?
It's coming. It is coming. Once I get settled after multiple, it's been a year of transition. Once we get settled, I'll have a studio set up to then provide an Audible version.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for being here. I know you're in a new home right now, or will be shortly. You're in between right now. We'll be in the new home. I wish you the best in that, the best with the pandemic. I hope your family stays happy and healthy, and all the best to you and those you help.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Chris.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.